We are going to be kicking this off with an 8-game slate on Saturday. The year is winding down, but we will have bowl coverage, so do not worry. But before we get there, let's talk the conference championship DFS slate. 8 games up, 8 games down. Kicking off with the Big 12 championship is Baylor taking on Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is a 5.5-point favorite in a game with a 46.5-point total overall. And one of the themes of this 8-game slate is there are 2 games far and above the rest. This is not one of them, but you still may want to pick off a play here and there, and even more if you're playing tournaments. But Baylor, they're slow, they're run heavy. Oklahoma State, they're fast, but they're run heavy. Both teams utilize a game manager quarterback, but Bohannon is a little bit less. He doesn't run quite as much. 301 rushing yards for him on the year, just 197.5 as a passer, only 23 attempts per game. So he's been efficient when he's been throwing. They just don't have him throw a lot. But again, they're near touchdown underdogs here. So we may see elevated pass attempts for Bohannon here, elevated run attempts. He's a guy that missed their last game, so that's a little bit of a concern, but they were basically locked into this game overall, so I think it was more precautionary. He was thrown before the game and whatnot. So Bohannon, maybe a GPP play. You can stack him. Tyquan Thornton at 5,700 is their clear alpha. He has a 30% target share, but because they're so run heavy, he hasn't eclipsed 8 targets in any of the last 3 games, and he only averages 7.3 on the year, just speaking to the run-heavy nature of the team. But you even have cheap options in R.J. Sneed, Ben Sims, the tight end, and Drew Estrada has had target counts of 5 and 7 in the last 2 games. He's only 3,300, so cheap stacking options there if you think this gets to eclipse the total, but not preferred options. In the run game, this is where we see a ton of volume because they are so run-heavy. Abram Smith is the leader, but it is about a 60-40 split between him and Tristan Ebner. Ebner handles most of the pass-catching duties, 30 targets, compared to Abram Smith, who is at just 15. And we have Ebner with at least 4 targets in the last 3 games. He's very active as a pass catcher, but ultimately Ebner is still involved enough to maybe target here. He has at least 11 carries as well in the last 3 games, but Abram Smith is the guy they want to use, especially on the ground. He has at least 20 carries in each of the last 3 games. The only concern is they're underdogs, and Oklahoma State plays phenomenal run defense, 90 yards allowed per game. So maybe you just don't see enough volume or efficiency from either back to get you there, but both certainly in play for tournaments. On the Oklahoma State side, Spencer Sanders is a little bit better everywhere than Bohannon, better rushing with 510 yards, 200 pass yards per game, which is somewhat depressed because he missed a game early in the year. 26.5 attempts is more than Bohannon. So just a little more upside with Sanders, but that's reflected in price. He's gotten easier to stack. Tay Martin at 7,300 is the clear alpha, and he's actually averaging 10.3 targets per game over the last 4. So there is quietly a decent workload here for Tay Martin. Brennan Presley's been the wide receiver 2 when healthy. He has not been healthy for most of the year, but he's been back of late. 8, 7, and 5 targets in his most recent game, so just middling. And then from there, you look at Bryson Green, Blaine Green, Jaden Bray. They're all splitting time, but for the most part, it's been Blaine Green and Jaden Bray. They're very cheap stacking options. They just don't play a consistent role for Oklahoma State. So you're not going to get secure targets with them. But again, 3.5 in the last 4 for Green, 2.3 for Bray. They're just cheap access points to this offense, which isn't very desirable to begin with. In the backfield, Jaylen Warren's been a monster. He had 4 straight games at the midpoint of the year where he had at least 30 touches, but that's been depressed recently, some because of game script. They killed Kansas. He got banged up in their second most recent game. But last week, he handled 18 carries, and Dominic Richardson, the backup, he only handled 1. No other running back touched the ball, suggesting Jaylen Warren has upside for that workload we saw at the midpoint of the year. It's a tough matchup. Baylor also plays strong run defense, but Warren is a bell cow back at a cheap price, and he is the best play in this game. Our second game is one of these elite totals, Kent State taking on Northern Illinois, 74.5 points, a 3-point spread in favor of Kent State. Kent State plays extremely fast, 78 plays per game, but fairly run-heavy, 42%. Northern Illinois is about average in terms of pace and also very run-heavy. But Kent State has one of the best price-adjusted quarterback plays on the slate in Dustin Crum, who's extremely mobile with 565 yards, and then he averages 233 as a passer on 28 attempts. And in competitive spots, he can be coaxed into much, much more, which is what we see here with Northern Illinois in a game that they already played this year, which just went absolutely bananas over the total. So again, both teams play horrific defense. Northern Illinois actually plays worse defense in terms of yards per pass attempt and yards per rush attempt. So Crum, excellent play for a team implied for nearly 40 points. You can stack him with Dante Cephas, Keyshawn Abram, Nykeem Johnson, and even Jayshawn Polk, who's played more than Nykeem Johnson of late. In the last 4 games, Polk 5.3 targets to Nykeem's 4.3. But ultimately, this Kent State team is typically running 4 wide on the field. And you have Dante Cephas as the alpha, Keyshawn Abram as the 2, and then Jayshawn Polk, Nykeem Johnson splitting time as the 3. For what it's worth, Nykeem has better efficiency than Polk, even if the targets have favored Polk in their most recent games. You see Nykeem with 508 receiving yards to Polk's 290, but I think you can play any of these guys. I am particularly interested in Cephas and the cheap guys, Nykeem and Jayshawn Polk. In the run game, phenomenal matchup against NIU that allows 226 rush yards per game. So Marquez Cooper, even though this is about a 70-30 split between Cooper and Xavier Williams, Cooper's handled at least 21 carries in 3 straight games. Xavier Williams has a little bit more of a volatile workload, and that will depend a lot on game script for him. So Cooper at 6,500, excellent GPP play. Xavier Williams at 44 could be a salary-saving option that you use in tournaments as well. On the Northern Illinois side, Rocky Lombardi missed their most recent game. Not sure what the deal is with him, but they were essentially locked into this contest. So I think similar to what we saw with Jerry Bohannon, that was just maintenance. He should be good to go here. He has 390 rush yards on the year. Interestingly, most of that came in just 3 games. Outside of that, he's actually had really poor rushing performances. So I'm confused if this is just an anomaly or if we could look to Lombardi as a dual threat. Ultimately, he's been efficient as a passer too, but the offense limits his attempts overall, just 26.8 attempts, 210 yards per game. There is a ceiling with Lombardi, and we've seen it a couple times this year, but there's also a floor. So he's just a little more volatile than a guy like Dustin Crum, even though he's in a phenomenal matchup. In the receiving game, Tyrese Ritchie's missed 3 straight games. No indication that he'll return, but Cole Tucker also missed their most recent game. That appears to be maintenance, similar to what we saw with Lombardi. So he's averaged 10.7 targets per game when he's been active this year, especially over the last 3. So that's a place to look. He's only 5K, plays a little bit more of the slot role, the underneath role. And then Trayvon Rudolph has been a guy with immense target upside. He was targeted 35 times in the first 2 games that Tyrese Ritchie got hurt, but he's only been targeted 12 times since. So also a little bit volatile, kind of goes as Lombardi goes. But these are just cheaper access points to the game. I believe they will be more contrarian than the Kent State side of things. They split the wide receiver 3 role between Messiah Travis and Muhammad Torre. And then in the tight end room, it is also a split between Tristan Twos and a few other players that aren't worth mentioning here. In the backfield, Harrison Whaley's been out since week 5. That's allowed Jevion Ducker to work as the feature back, but he splits time with Clint Ratkovich and Ontario Brown a little bit, and he does not have a good pass-catching role. So if they get down in games, it is a concern for Jevion Ducker. He only has 3 targets on the year, whereas Clint Ratkovich has 17, and he's operated as the clear pass-catching back over Ducker. Ducker does have at least 20 carries in 2 of the last 3 games and at least 19 in 3 of the last 4. So he does have a pretty good workload. Kent State is not good against the run, 189 yards allowed per game. But again, Ducker just a little more volatile than maybe even like a Marquez Cooper on the other side. Game 3 is the Mountain West Championship, one of the worst ones on the slate, a 50-point total. It is Utah State taking on San Diego State, who's been a steel trap on defense all year. Spread is 5.5 points in favor of the Aztecs. 2 very different teams overall. Utah State is extremely fast with 79 plays per game, 48% pass rate. San Diego State slow at 66 plays per game, 39% pass rate. And the defenses are much different as well. Utah State, they're going up against a buzzsaw. Logan Bonner has been efficient. He's benefited from elevated play rates. Andrew Peasley comes on the field occasionally for like gadget plays, but it's mostly Bonner. Not mobile with 68 yards, but does average 272 through the air on 31.5 attempts. So Bonner has good volume. It's just that play volume should be depressed here against San Diego State and efficiency as well. So a little bit difficult to target at an elevated price. The receiving game should be something to potentially look at with Devin Thompkins averaging 130 yards per game. Pretty clearly projects over 100 yards that is. And he's averaging 11.5 targets. He already has 1,500 yards. And Thompkins is occasionally active in the run game too. He's just so involved that he needs to be considered even in the worst matchups. From there, they run 4 wide, and Derek Wright's a bit expensive for his price, 5.8 targets per game, when you can get 5.3 for 1.2K cheaper in bowling. You can get 4.8 for 3.5K from Justin McGriff. Again, not a ton of upside with some of these guys. Bowling has the best efficiency for his volume, but it's pretty close between him and Derek Wright, and tough matchup. I'm not sure if you want to play the ancillary Utah guys. Calvin Tyler has handled a feature back workload when games are close. They just haven't played in a ton of those recently. In their most recent games, blowout. So Tyler just 10 carries when Elian Noah comes in for 7, and even John Gentry, who hadn't seen a carry in 2 weeks, comes in for 7. It's basically Tyler's the lead back, maybe a 70-30 split between him and Noah, and then Gentry only comes in blowouts. But overall, the pass game role is split, the carries are split, and it's a tough matchup. So I don't think either preferred plays with Tyler maybe being a GPP option. For San Diego State, they're a rare team with a quarterback battle still going on in the conference title game. They win mostly with defense in the run game, but Lucas Johnson played so poorly against Boise State that he gets benched, and Jordan Brookshire leads a phenomenal comeback. Brookshire had a great game, the best game of his career, so it's tough to decipher whether this is a new Jordan Brookshire or if he's going to fall back on the poor performance we'd seen earlier in his career. But he is very mobile, and that is something that Lucas Johnson was not great with. Lucas just semi-mobile. Brookshire has 138 yards already and very limited opportunities. But again, just a very low volume, run-heavy pass attack, so Brookshire is not a great play. The same thing goes for his stacking options. Jesse Matthews is the 12 targets for him. And we saw Boise State coax them into negative game script, so he would be the preferred option. But from there, Elijah Cothey, Tyrell Shavers are the 2 and the 3. You'll see BJ Busby function as the wide receiver 3. And then Daniel Bellinger, he functions as the tight end. So a little bit of a rotation towards the end of that receiving room. Matthews is the most consistent option, followed by Cothey overall, and Shavers and Busby rotating. In the backfield, it is a timeshare. Greg Bell is the lead back, but he will cede a little bit of work here and there to Chance Bell, Keegan Williams, and Jordan Byrd. Jordan Byrd is the preferred pass catcher, but they do not really target running backs a lot in this offense. Bell, he has at least 15 carries in 4 straight games. He averages 17.8 touches per game. So if you're taking a stab on somebody who's actually in a pretty decent matchup against the Utah State defense, allowing 173 yards per game on the ground, Bell would be the guy, and I think he's fine for tournaments. Game 4, the Sun Belt Championship, is App State taking on Louisiana Lafayette, a rematch of a game earlier this year where Louisiana Lafayette absolutely blew the doors off App State, giving them one of their 2 losses. But App State is a 3-point favorite here. They've been in nothing but blowout victories of late, while Lafayette has played a couple close games here and there. It is a 53-point total overall, making this a less desirable game on the slate. Chase Bryce, the Duke, the Clemson transfer, has been fairly mobile, 124 yards, but he's only averaging 28 attempts per game, has been extremely efficient on those attempts with 242 yards, but he did play his worst game of the year against Louisiana earlier this year, and Louisiana is one of the better defenses he will face again. Fortunately, he does have solid targets. Corey Sutton's the alpha, 7.6 targets per game for him, 74 yards. He's cheap enough below 5K where you could take a stab. From there, Thomas Hennigan and Malik Williams are pretty close in targets, 5.7 per game for Williams, 5.6 for Hennigan. Difference in yardage is minimal as well. They're almost the same in terms of usage. So looking to Williams as the cheaper guy, 4,300, makes more sense here. In the run game, they're now fully healthy. They battled injury throughout the year. Peoples has missed time. Daytrich Hamilton had a season-ending injury last year that he's only recently come back from. But we are now going to see Nate Noel, Cameron Peoples, and it looks like Daytrich Hamilton handle most of the backfield work here. Anderson Castle, the converted linebacker, has played a little bit, but those have been mostly in blowouts. In competitive games, you likely see a 3-headed monster, which is difficult on an 8-game slate. We like these more on slates where you have short slates, fewer teams. But if I were ranking them, it would be Noel 1, Peoples 2, Harrington 3. Not great options. Louisiana operates in much of the same ways that App State does. Very run-heavy, semi-slow. Lewis is a game manager. Slightly better rushing chops than Bryce, but not great. Little less efficient as a passer, but similar volume at 27.5 attempts per game. So just not great around the board for Lewis. He's also hard to stack, unlike Bryce. They use a nasty rotation at receiver, and it has not trended in any direction. Their former alpha, LeBlanc, has actually trended in the wrong direction in terms of snaps and routes run. So right now, Errol Rogers and Michael Jefferson and Jalen Williams have been guys that have been involved. Errol Rogers has been running a lot more routes lately. So if you're taking a stab on a guy at 3,300, I mean, I guess, but no one on this offense averages more than 3.5 targets per game, and nobody averages 30 receiving yards on the year. So you're really throwing darts here with Louisiana Lafayette in the pass game. In the run game, they're also a 3-man committee similar to App State. Chris Smith, Montrell Johnson, Amani Bailey. No consistency to this. Amani Bailey's led the team in carries in the last 2 weeks, but Smith leads the team on the year. Montrell has his games as well. The 2 games before Bailey led, Montrell actually led. So it's actually been 4 weeks where Chris Smith has kind of been one of the forgotten men, but still very involved. He was over 10 carries in 3 of the last 4. So it's a 3-way committee. View this very similar to the App State situation. The SEC Championship, phenomenal real-life game, but only a 50-point total, so not fantastic for DFS. 6.5-point spread in favor of Georgia. Georgia is a tough evaluation. They're extremely slow, extremely run-heavy, but they are a team that has blown out most of their opponents, and they've rotated players. They have not given away the goods in terms of offense. It's a really tough evaluation, and we might see more efficiency. We might see more condensed opportunity, and it makes them a phenomenal target for GPPs, but we just don't know. Like Stetson Bennett, he's now usurped JT Daniels as the starter, but we've seen both quarterbacks in a lot of games, a lot of that due to blowout, and I think Bennett has a long leash here, and he probably plays the whole game without a doubt unless there's a catastrophe. He's more mobile than Daniels. He has 240 rushing yards this year, but only 180 passing. That's actually really efficient considering he only has 16 and a half attempts per game. If Bama keeps it close and forces the pass, we know their OC Todd Monken likes to push it downfield, use multiple tight ends, and do some creative things. Maybe Bennett has an untapped ceiling we haven't seen yet. Again, this whole offense kind of works that way. He's really hard to stack. They have Brock Bowers, who's their only clear option in the pass game. From there, they've now returned Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens from injuries, serious injuries. They both had a target last game, but I don't think either plays a full complement of snaps. That means you should still see a lot of Adonai Mitchell, Jermaine Burton, Kearis Jackson should be back. There's just a lot of pass catchers that are rotating in. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, tight end Darnell Washington. The list goes on. Really hard to stack. I would prefer Bowers. He's expensive. From there, I would go to like a Jermaine Burton in the mid-price range if stacking with Bennett. In the run game, it is a 4-way committee at first glance, but they're getting back Kendall Milton, which could make it 5. I will say they have condensed opportunity in the past. So Dajuan Edwards and Kenny McIntosh are perhaps going to get phased out of this offense in favor of Zamir White and James Cook. And we've seen this in the somewhat competitive games this year. White is going to be their banger. Cook is going to be their pass catcher. Tough matchup against Bama, but there is upside just based on we don't know what the ceiling is at Georgia right now. For Bama, it's easily their toughest game on paper of the year. They've been heavy favorites in most of their contests, but now they're 6.5-point underdogs in a very difficult matchup. So Bryce Young, who's not mobile despite his recruiting label, negative rushing yardage on the year, he's going to have to get it done through the air against a very difficult Georgia defense. He averages 325 pass yards per game on 35 attempts, but you would expect the efficiency to decline. With that said, the game script should favor him in the pass game, and Alabama plays very fast and pass heavy, so Young should have volume on his side. Good GPP play. Also easy to stack. Very condensed target share between John Mechie and Jamison Williams. Mechie had 22 targets in their last game. That's because Jamison Williams got ejected for targeting. When they're both healthy, it's going to be close in terms of targets. In the 3 prior games, they were actually identical in terms of target share. Williams is used a little more downfield, so the preference is towards him, but it's reflected in price. Both are good plays. They don't use the consistent wide receiver 3. They'll use Bolden. Then they'll use 2 tight ends a lot with Cameron Latou and Jaleel Billingsley. Ja'Cory Brooks actually popped up for 5 targets as well. He'll rotate in and out with Bolden a bit. In the run game, biggest storyline in the game is Brian Robinson's injury. Left last week's game, and he's labeled day-to-day, so we legit might not see him. And Bama has already lost Roydell Williams and Jace McClellan, so they're very thin. They actually moved linebacker Demoy Kennedy to running back. He's not in the player pool, so don't worry about him. But if Robinson can't go, it's going to be Trey Sanders functioning in an elite role for Alabama. We should see a lot of carries for him. Robinson's been up near 30 carries multiple times this year in competitive games. So if active, would have no hesitation playing Robinson in tournaments either. But Sanders would become a much better price-adjusted play. Houston taking on Cincinnati for the AAC. These teams did not meet in the regular season, but Houston's been phenomenal. 1 loss on the year occurred in their opener. And now they are 10-point underdogs to Cincinnati, and Houston has taken a decent amount of money here. They've blown out almost each and every opponent this year, where Cincinnati's played a lot of competition really close. Now, 53-point total, so not great for DFS. Cincinnati's slow. Houston's about balanced in terms of pass rate and average and play rate, but Clayton Tune has been far more mobile in the past than he is this year. He's mainly getting it done through the air, 30 attempts per game, 251 yards, and he now draws a very difficult matchup. Cincinnati's actually shown leaks on the ground, not really through the air. So Alton McCaskill could be an interesting GPP play. He split time a little more recently with Tazon Henry, but they've been blowing out opponents. And McCaskill was banged up a little bit towards the end of the year, but in competitive games, he'll out-carry Tazon Henry. It's going to be about a 60-40, maybe 65-35 split. So in a tough matchup, It's a tough defense overall, but they are a little more giving against the ground. I think they're interesting for GPPs. If you're playing Toon and stacking him, Nathaniel Dell is the clear alpha. He's just a bit expensive for the matchup. Again, Cincinnati's strength is their pass coverage and their pass rush. And Dell, he averages 86 yards per game, but on 9.2 targets. You can find better price-adjusted plays for volume. The wide receiver 2 is Jeremy Singleton right now. They've been dealing with an injury to Keyshawn Carter. Not sure he's going to return. Then you have Jake Herslow splitting time with Jalen Irwin as the wide receiver 3. Christian Trayan is the tight end. They're all just middling plays in a very difficult game environment. They're only implied for 21 points, so not great on Houston. For Cincinnati, they are implied for 31.5, so they do have a lot of intrigue. Ritter's a game manager plus. He's been more active recently, 342 rushing yards. That's going to be a career low for him when he finishes the year, unless there's some crazy anomaly games. But he still averages 250 pass yards per game on 28 attempts. So Ritter is efficient enough where if Houston can coax him into a more up-tempo, pass-heavy environment, there's a ceiling. He's just really expensive for this game environment. And there's Crum, who's cheaper, and there's 2 quarterbacks in a later game that we'll talk about that are much, much better projections than him. Jerome Ford at 7,100. After he missed a game due to injury, 19 carries in back-to-back weeks, averaging 94 rushing yards. Active in the pass game. Jerome Ford is everything you could possibly want to target in GPPs. Still a little hesitant in cash plays, but I think he's on the outside for that kind of conversation too. Jerome Ford is a pretty good play. Alec Pierce is their leading receiver, and they've now missed Michael Young 2 straight games. He should come back as their 2, but they've actually gotten a lot of production out of Trey Tucker and Tyler Scott. So I don't think that wide receiver 2 is a clear picture. I believe it's a rotation between those 3. And then you'll have Josh Wiley rotating in and out with Leonard Taylor. Sometimes they'll use 12 personnel. Those guys are like 60% of the time players, but Pierce is expensive. He needs negative game script to hit his ceiling. Only 22% target share for him. 6,600 is still a bit expensive for Pierce, but if you're stacking Ritter, he's the best option. Michigan, Iowa. This is the stone worst game for DFS on the board. Really interesting for real life. Michigan, they're 11-point favorites, which is pretty drastic for the Big Ten championship. Iowa limping their way into this game. Michigan's actually fairly fast, 71 plays per game, about a 40% pass rate. Cade McNamara relies on negative game scripts and opponents to push him in order to reach a ceiling, which we haven't seen lately. And they've even used J.J. McCarthy as a gadget player at times, so the snaps aren't 100% for McNamara, making him a difficult play. That makes him hard to stack. And as McNamara goes, you'll see Cornelius Johnson, Eric All, Roman Wilson. All these guys require negative game script to a degree to reach their ceiling. As you can see, no one more than 3 targets in the last game. Difficult situation to get to. In the run game, Hassan Haskins put the game on his back against Ohio State, 28 carries. My goodness, the guy's had at least 20 carries in 5 straight games. I mean, the workload is enormous. Over 100 yards per game now on average. The only issue is Blake Corum returned. He was not healthy enough to handle more than 6 carries, and they led pretty consistently through that game. So I think if it had been closer, perhaps we saw more Blake Corum. This game doesn't project to be that. So this could be another elite Haskins workload game, but he's not priced for it. So he's a little interesting contrarian option potentially at the top. Corum is the best pass catcher. And again, Iowa 11-point underdogs. They don't project to really push Michigan towards a pass catching script, but Corum's really cheap. If we get news he's healthier, he could be just a cash saving option here to get to other studs in your lineup. But Corum interesting here. Iowa plays fairly good run defense, but against weak competition in the West, this will be one of the harder games they played all year. Iowa, not much to say overall. Petrus and Padilla, they're both horrible. Petrus got hurt for a bit. We got to look at Padilla. He's equally as bad. These are the 2 worst quarterback plays in the slate. Neither can run, neither can pass. Both are not options. If you do, for whatever reason, decide to stack Iowa or use the pass catcher as a one-off, it's either tight end Sam Laporta or Keegan Johnson, who's emerged a lot of late, averaging 6.8 targets per game over the last 4. I prefer Johnson at 3,800, but neither are strong plays with a very low scoring expectation for Iowa. Their implied team total is just barely above 16. They don't have a good offensive line either, which is a huge mismatch. Like, they have 4 newcomers, and they've been very bad. That has stemmed into the run game where Goodson has handled a massive workload, but he's been wildly inefficient. He's averaging 22.4 touches per game. Good pass catching role for Goodson, but very little efficiency expected here. He's a guy that we haven't seen a big ceiling from at all this year. Just not as explosive as some backs. Not explosive enough to overcome the deficiencies of this team. So just Goodson for Iowa. Last game on the main slate, we have Pittsburgh taking on Wake Forest for the ACC. 3-point spread in favor of Pittsburgh. And this game features a 73-point total. Both teams are north of 80 plays per game. Pittsburgh's passing 54% of the time, and Wake Forest is at 48.5%. Just phenomenal game environment overall. Pickett, he's the best quarterback on the slate in terms of raw projection. He's 9,700, so that's reflected in price to a degree, but he's mobile. He averages nearly 340 pass yards per game on 39 attempts. Wake Forest does not play good defense. They're worse against the run, but Pickett has dissected even the best defenses in this conference. He's still a great play, easy to stack to with Jordan Addison, who's expensive, but he's averaging 13.3 targets per game and 112 yards. Addison has that elite ceiling. Jared Wayne has emerged as the wide receiver 2 over Taysier Mack, who is out with injury, not expected to see him. So Wayne, he's a better price-adjusted play, 4,400. You can easily double-stack Pitt because of that. From there, the wide receiver 3 is Shockey Jacques Louis, but sometimes he comes off the field when Pitt uses 12 personnel, which will feature Lucas Krull and Gavin Bartholomew. Lucas Krull, 7 targets last game, Bartholomew 5. They're both cheap price-adjusted options and access points to Pitt. Krull would be the preferred option at 3,900. The run game, we saw Israel Abanikanda held out of their last game just due to precaution. They were locked into this game, so Pitt, they didn't need to use him, and he will be back here. Abanikanda leads the team in touches per game when healthy. He's the most efficient back this team has. He's also the best pass catcher. Vincent Davis can do the things Abanikanda can, just not as well. Rodney Hammond is more of a banger in the run game, and he will siphon off some carries from Abanikanda. He's actually carried the ball 15 times in 3 of the last 4 games. So I'm expecting to see mostly Abanikanda and Hammond split the role, but Davis coming in as a change of pace occasionally. Wake Forest allows 216 rush yards per game, so this is meaningful, and this could be a GPP winning spot for people. On the other side, Sam Hartman has been just as impressive as Pickett, just not quite the same counting stats. A little more mobile, 343 yards for him on the ground, but averaging over 300 through the air at 309.5 on 35 attempts. So Hartman's been wildly efficient. Pitt is a pass funnel defense. They only allow 92 rush yards per game, but 279.5 passing. So Hartman, excellent play here. Very easy to stack. 25.5 or 24.5% target share for A.T. Perry, 24% on the dot for Jackery Roberson. These guys both have over 1,000 yards already this year. Play whichever one you want. I prefer Roberson at the much cheaper price. He's $1,200 cheaper, but both A.T. Perry and Roberson are excellent. The wide receiver 3 has been increasingly split between Taylor Morin and Donald Stewart. Stewart has actually out-targeted Morin each of the last 2 games, but the overall yardage on the season goes to Morin. So it doesn't make a huge difference to me who you stack out of the third wide receiver. Stewart and Morin both make some sense, and they should split this role. In the run game, Wake Forest is going to use a 3-way committee between Christian Beal-Smith, Christian Turner, and then either Justice Ellison or Quinton Cooley. It will depend on the health status of Ellison, who we haven't seen in 2 weeks, but Cooley, 14 carries in the last game. This could even be a 4-way committee in the worst case scenario. Interestingly, Cooley played a lot early in this game, and Christian Turner, who finished with more carries at 18, Turner outcarried Cooley 18-4, and he outcarried Beal-Smith 18-6. Most of Turner's work came in the second half. He only had 2 touches in the first half of their most recent game, and 7 of these carries occurred on the final drive, which was just 7 consecutive plays as Wake Forest drained the clock. So a little concerned with Turner. He's also been way less efficient than Beal-Smith. They only have 3 carries separating them, but Beal-Smith has nearly 140 more rushing yards than Turner. So I think the most likely situation, assuming Beal-Smith is healthy, is he returns to lead the backfield in carries, but ultimately this ends up being a 3-way timeshare either way. But that's the main slate. We also have the USC Cal showdown slate. It's on the night slate for FanDuel. Not much to dissect here. I'll get into it briefly. Cal's a 4.5-point favorite. This is the game they rescheduled after Cal had a COVID outbreak. The defense for USC is super concerning, particularly on the ground. And Cal, they also have been left a little bit to be desired. Both teams are 4-7, but USC is very pass heavy. They're very fast. Jackson Dart should start again. Slovis has returned to practice at limited capacity, but still not doing much. Ingram's questionable. He's day-to-day. Ingram's the lead back when healthy. If he's out, expect Malapai and Darwin Barlow to split the work. No Drake London, so we saw Gary Bryant emerge as the alpha in the last game. Taj Washington still very involved. And then they used a lot of tight end Lake McCree. They also will use a bit of like Kyle Ford, Michael Jackson splitting time as the 3, but prefer Gary Bryant here among the pass catchers. On the Cal side, Garbers is very mobile, so he's interesting. Just doesn't have like the same ceiling as a USC passer because of the offense overall. USC just more fast, more pass heavy. But in the run game, Brooks has handled more of the workload lately. they've kind of phased out Damian Moore, Marcel Dancy, and Chris Street. They'll all come in for a change of pace, but Brooks is still the lead back. Best matchup on the day for him. Cheap price on both platforms. Interested in Brooks a lot. And then they use 4 pass catchers clearly. It's Kekoa Crawford 1, Trayvon Clark 3, and then Nico Remigio and tight end Jake Tongs are the ancillary options. Tongs is very cheap on DraftKings, and he's an access point to getting multiple studs if you're playing the showdown. But that's conference championship week. Let me know in the comment section your favorite plays. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out, and we'll see you again next time.